So, on to the introduction, let's say, and I will do sharing of the screen, yes, um, to start off. I wonder if this is the right screen to start off with. Um, Perhaps. Um, so layers, like, well, first of all, the kind of organizational Photoshop idea, like some people have heard about it and some might not. Um, but this was the kind of a, you could say, a metaphor in some ways, like of that came from the sort of OBOK and etc. That one form where they could be put is like essentially an organizational Photoshop, um, like organizational editor, in the sense of like how to put the scene in a form that it behaves like a tool in an application in a way, and how to think of roles as like almost like having this canvas, but now I apply roles, or now I apply a move there, and then I move it to a different place, etc. And yes, it's a metaphor, but there's something interesting about it because it's so functionality oriented, and and it's been an idea, but it's never really been explored super deeply. Um, but I think the topic today is an interesting possibility to do that, while it's also a continuation of the topics that have been present in the last few weeks, and kind of like what kind of tools could XORG have at its hand. Um, but yeah, so what I wanted to uh, have like 3 points where I could start, but I'll start here because this is fairly simple. I'll scroll in, and this is of course the mirror board. Let me actually share the link. Like, um, I think most of you have editing rights, but if you don't, we can try to do something about that. Let me just put the link in the chat. It's the old usual one for those that know. So, so this is super minimal, and I'm intentionally starting with the minimal sense. So it also connects to the memes or gems, like that is gameable memes, which was a topic approached earlier, and I think this also for that topic, the gems provides an interesting mechanic towards how to compose them and create them. So we can visit that possibility along the side. It's almost like an extra bonus because the key starting point is uh, maybe the more general use of it. So, so if you think of this like, it's okay. Here is an image just picked out of um, Pinterest. By the way, for new images, I have a selection of sources. So if we at some point need to pick new ones, I'm prepared. But anyway, we can start from this, and like as just as an example. And we can think of this image as kind of a context. One can also think of it as a scene, in a way, like seen in a context-like manner. Now, there is like underneath here, I just wrote suits, which is a type. And this is kind of like almost like tarotic type, like a suit in a tarot deck. And then I just wrote two suit names, which are new ones, like shadows or reflections. And I also wrote inside, in the kind of meme gene way, projections, which is maybe a boring example, but nevertheless. Now, but the one thing I want to point out here is like if we think of this image as a scene, as a context, adding that such a thing, like adding, like say, uh, the text of this could be a suit, or in a suit of shadows or reflections, or adding like this kind of text of projections or anything else. Well, obviously it behaves like a layer. It also behaves like a layer in the sense that we can move it. but in a way we can think of it as a layer in a deeper manner, um, like what happens when you add that? Like there isn't, let's say, an image without it first, and then it's just an image. But what happens to the process and to the image when, say, this word projections is added? Um, and we could even put oh, somehow it changed my keyboard. I have to. Okay, fine. Um, so if I add their projections of reality, like what happens with this addition to the image itself? That's an open question. Like I could keep on talking, but I talk too much anyway. So I open it as a question.
Of course, there's like a lot of meaning that cascades down the line. I mean, the image changes. Also, if you would export it, Google would index the text in it, so you would be actually able to search for the image with the text. So it's like a whole situation of putting into words, making explicit things that might not be explicit, both for humans and for machines.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it creates a lot of like connections in my mind, at least.
Yeah, like the latter part, the creating connections in the mind, um, is kind of like uh, maybe something I think to focus upon. Like, I mean, the easy way to say would be that the this text or adding these words acts like a filter. That's I think a good way of thinking about it. Like so in a way, like this image without, say, these projections of reality is a different thing. How has it changed? Well, the text, well, not just the text, but the ideas in it become like a filter, and therefore the image is seen through the filter, and what it gives, what it generates, is changed. Yeah, like, but uh, but thinking of these like layers, like the layered thinking, uh, especially by the generations or are cultured by Photoshop, can easily create this idea that, well, we could have this layer on, which says projections, or and we could combine that with, I added this layer that the source of light is the heart, in quotations, or we could have either or, and then all of them are different generators because the filters are changed in and of itself. Um, so so the kind of layer thinking uh, can be kind of, I think it condenses a certain power uh, when it's seen as this sort of filter. And I would make a quick reference. Let's see if I can scroll fast enough to here, to earlier sessions. So we were playing with this idea that the meta is not really separated. Like even this sort of conversation, say in an organization, is kind of meta in itself. But then adding this game-like mechanics was like extension of that. But also you can say like really the mechanics are kind of filters to the situation. Like if we say, oh, we are having a normal conversation, but let's say we also have this query mechanics, that there are these moves like making a query and making a response. It's kind of filtering the situation as well. Like, so in essence, it is also layer-like, if that makes sense. If it doesn't, tell me. Maybe it didn't make sense because there is silence, or I asked the other way around. But
It did make sense, I
yeah,
think.
yeah.
Pekko, would you categorize or characterize filters as a sort of like focusing the scope of meaning?
maybe calibrating,
Mm.
like yes, it's focus. Like it's not. I don't think it's wrong to say it's focus, but it's like calibration in the sense, like really the kind of filter idea I think works because like if we think like we have an image and then we put a red filter on, it's still the same image, but now everything is red. Um, uh, but of course, the filter could be something like, I don't know, turning it into line art, and then once again it would be different and so on. So like all of them are kind of calibrations, but I think this
They're
is
also all a bit, sorry, Becco, but they're also interesting with the filter, I think, is that they're destructive in some sense, right? Once applied, you can't really take them away, even if you kind of take it away.
yeah, like, or they have had their effect even if you take them away. Like there's almost like this sort of ghost image in your head, so to speak. Oh, Jakub is coming.
Exactly.
Good. Hello, Jakub. You're interestingly. Oh, the camera is in horizontal view. Oh, it wasn't. That was an interesting entrance, anyway. So, can you hear us?
Hello, hi everyone.
Hello. I think you can jump in here. We're like currently approaching like the topic of filters and layers and how what happens when, say, this example image in the screen or in the shared screen is if we add, say, a text of projections, what happens to the image and the kind of filtering quality to it. And I agree with Martin, your comment that in a way, like if you take them away, the imprint is there still, like which I don't think is only negative, or it's like can be positive in the sense that it's kind of like a house where you have walked in a certain direction. So you cannot get rid of the memory that you can also walk that way, and there is this kind of stuff that way. But then if you put another filter, then you walk into a different kind of direction, and you have like another corridor in a way, branching out from the image. Um, um, but like the layer thought here, first of all, this idea that that brings immediately, if we think of this sort of almost like Photoshop-like culture of layers, is like a layer can always be added. We could put here like, let me make an example. I'll put it actually on the side to just have a different example. Role. Tarot reader. That's a filter as well. Like now, even though it's on the side, but now it's a role, but it's a possibility. Like, okay, actually now we have this text here, but on the image, and maybe those are part of the tarot-like reading as well. But the role behaves like a filter and like a layer as well. Like if we take it off, the situation is different. But similarly, if we, let's see if I can write into the same text box. If I put like this, goal, oh God. So, okay. Like if I put a goal, like say name the card, if this is now a card, a similar change has happened. And I could put a rule here and the same thing happens as well. So there is a kind of like a resonance or harmony between like the kind of approaches we used last time, this sort of like adding in some certain rules, and this sort of like a filter-like quality, and this case of like image plus text, which while kind of mimetic or going to the elements of building memes and themes as well. But that's we can explore that later. But this kind of example of an image and text is a good concretization, good example of this filter-like quality and layer-like quality. But if we see at the same time that actually if we say are in a kind of always in this meta situation that is extended by, say, rules, it behaves the same manner. It has the same, like adding a new role for that is available, like floating there to be taken, or adding a new goal floating there to be taken to the situation becomes a filter-like thing, similarly as this text on the image.
I'm thinking how the role as a filter sort of has this essence of being like a call to action. So it's like a filter upon actions. So instead of like filtering a noun, it filters a verb. I don't know, that idea came to my mind.
Yeah, it's a big can of worms. It's a good highlight. But why the like how to put it in a more nutshell fashion, because it could open like a lot of discussion. Well, maybe it's good discussion, we can see. But one of the reasons why role like has this sort of operative quality, like or verb or how you call it, is that actually the filters work both directions. We're going to use the image again as an example. Like this is my way of concretizing things. What happens once again when we put, say, the word projections to this image and it changes? You can think that it's a filter towards the image and the image changes. But it's actually a filter also inside because your process changes. So it's a two-directional filter. And the role just happens to be a kind of specialization which is like push this inside. Like this is a filter particularly towards the inside of your process. It still behaves like a filter, but it takes this double way and kind of puts the emphasis on the inner way. But actually, all of these filters are dual direction. Like it's impossible when we say the image changes. What really changes is our process towards the image. Like we see different things, but that's an inner process. And that is actually rather useful and important, and it creates these things like roles, which are then kind of like specializing on the inner process, and then affecting from there your expression and what you do, how you act, and therefore kind of pushing from the inside to outside, like starting the loop, going towards inside and then coming to outside from there. If that makes, I hope that makes sense. Like, this is actually, for me, almost like an elementary part of almost all the games that have like a high interpretational or expressive quality, which also means organizations, like because they usually rely highly on interpretation and expression. Like in a way, you could say like, oh, let's start the project. Here's the name of the project. That's one filter. Oh, you get this role. That's another filter. And we're slamming them into the context. The context might be anywhere, or we could say, let's use this table. And there is a paper that's kind of a context, but it's also kind of a filter in itself, like it, or at least a frame. But like building that is exactly the same, structurally speaking, or processually speaking, as the kind of qualities that we're kind of observing with this image, or observing with the role and the goal.
But it's sorry, I had to miss a few syllables now, or lines of what you were speaking. But is it so that we can attach this the faculty of things being filters to pretty much every element? Is that a general thing? Is it? I mean, what would not be a filter?
Well, that's a good question. Like, I think everything has a bit of a filter in it. I mean, this goes back a long way. It's like one of my main directions when I was still in game design. This is like 2006, when there was this, like, I think bigger game designer, computer game designer, said in the game developers conference, like, well, nobody can do something like a whole world of a game on a postcard or something like this. And then my immediate reaction in the head was, well, of course you can. And then I said, like, I'll do it. And then I didn't know how to do it, but I had this immediate kind of impression that that's certainly possible. And then, like, thinking of it for a week, I then immediately realized that if I make the game out of filters, that's completely possible. And then I made actually a business card size, well, a series of business card size games, which were like essentially like saying like the place you are, wherever you are, is a crystal maze. Like if you're seeing walls, they are crystal, like transparent. The people moving about are part of a nameless, a kind of spiderweb-like organization, and observe their movements to figure out what this organization is, for example. So that like text takes in the whole world, but why it takes the whole world is because it's filter-like. It just, but in a way, it's not different from other game description in a way. Like it's just like it's more aware that it behaves like a filter in itself. And also, like, if we take this, what I'm saying now, I think it's completely valid to say that this is now a filter that affects the things that have happened in these sessions previously, like before, and adding these words here is filtering that and modifying it in itself. It's not like the filter likeness is the only way to look at it, but it's definitely, if you start looking for it, it's there, and it also starts to explain certain things, open up like things. And if somebody makes a comment now, it will be a filter towards whatever we have in our heads, individual heads, about the session as well. So can somebody make a sample comment? We can observe the filter likeness of it.
I will. For me, it feels a bit like this filter activity is almost the description of what is an assemblage, or what makes an assemblage, or how do you make an assemblage, right?
Yeah, and
it's like a generic. It's a kind of generic, polymutual relationship, like.
Yes, and because everything is ultimately an assemblage, like the things don't merge completely, but they have some separation. There's a way to see this assemblage quality, which is in everything. Certainly, once again, not the only way, but put it on a house. And I should spell it correctly, because I'm picky that way. Okay, so but this in itself, like as a quality, it's kind of like looking at both the kind of raw roots of much of play and organizational action. Once again, not 100%. This is the only way, but it's also like fairly practical, or it has promises of practical directions. And this is one of the reasons why I picked this sort of super practical example, which constantly kind of reveals this sort of filter likeness, like the image. Because, okay, if we continue from here to this, like, why I named the layer is like, well, we have talked about the filter much more. That's one thing. But the second reason is, like, if we think of layers and we have this sort of Photoshoppy mindset, then it precisely brings this sort of, I would say, a certain freedom or liberty of, oh, I'll actually look at this card only of thinking of the assemblage. And it's one version, because like layers can be turned off and on, or I will move it, or I'll take the combination of the heart and the assemblage, and I forget the projections, and that creates a different kind of interpretation. You can probably notice how we are very close to, or essentially standing right on top of the memes as well, currently.
I came up with a name and I have the urge to share it. Should I?
Put it in. Like, I put this in Miro for a reason that that this could be editable. Like, I had a nice Photopia setup here, but it's not communal editing, so. Yeah, exactly. And now it's different again. Like, so in this sense, like having this thought of like filter likeness, but then adding this sort of layer likeness, that whatever is added to the context, the scene being now this image, and of course the things that we have added to the scene, like the words, and what Pablo, you just added, the title, like are kind of landed on the scene. But if we also kind of keep in mind these layers, there is this sort of liberty of like, it's not like writing in stone in a way. Like it's kind of like there's this flexibility in it. I wanted to ask you, Pablo, like, what made you think of this title?
I mean, the projections of reality and the shadows within a cave made me think of Plato's cave, but then it also has a cinematic quality to it. So I wanted to give like a cinema kind of title, like a Hollywood-esque kind of title. And also I first named it Plato's Cave 2, but then I thought it was interesting to leave the 2 for something else, like leave that space open up a slot just by implying there's a 2. Yeah, I guess that's it.
And now what you explained actually filters your title. Like, somebody reads the title, they might probably will kind of take that into account. Although if you're thinking layers, you could think, no, I forget everything you said and I read it my way. But this, like, I mean, on the side, these rules, like similarly to the things we did last time. I don't know if I need to scroll, but just trying to be, like, for example, we made this kind of an expansion to this conversational situation, which was like called puzzle, like just a couple of mechanics, which had the moves of express a puzzle and express something solutional. And of course, added to those mechanics was this sort of like how we can expand the sense of what a puzzle is. Like how, like, you know, like you could say that this image is a puzzle or can be taken as a puzzle. And maybe the goal of the puzzle is to name it, but immediately when you free the puzzle from the sense of like having one answer, it still behaves similarly, but it's kind of more expressive in a way. But like I said, those rules, everything we have been talking about applies to them as well. And the organizational example of like, oh, now we are in a project this and that, like this hour is dedicated to project this and that. And my role is to be the meeting host, so therefore I start talking about what's on the agenda and so on. Like, it's all the same thing. But that puts like this sort of almost like potentially Photoshopy or tool-like quality of this sort of filter layer approach. To make a practical example, okay, we are creating an organizational situation. Like, what if we start from, okay, like I put this title on it. Well, I don't like it, I make a variation of it. I put these roles, or I take these roles which we like, and I think this applies here. And then we play that situation for 10 minutes, but then we decide, let's add this role, or let's add this mechanic or moves of, like, for example, express a puzzle, and then that goes for 5 minutes, and then somebody says, let's move away from that and add these two things, or whatever it is. Like, it's doing the same things that a normal organization is doing. It's affecting the situation, but the whole situation is in a much more potentially playful mindset, and it's also much more expansive in terms of capability of what can be expressed in terms of changing the operation, filtering the operation to be different.
I'm having a thought right now, like
Mhm.
when you sort of like pass things through a mesh, right? And you filter them. There's always something that you want to get out. Like can be like a purification process, or like some form of like, there's a remnant. That's what I want to get to. And
There's a what?
a remnant of the filtering process, something that is left out.
Or like remain residue, I think. Yeah.
The remain residue, yes.
Or yeah.
And I'm just curious, if we can make that explicit maybe with a filter, what is left out. Like, I mean, if we just add words to an image, I guess what is left out is every other word in every other placement. But I'm curious if there's like a process of identifying the remains of the filtering.
I mean, there could be many processes. I don't think there is the process, but for example, if we had, say, a role of, I don't know, scribe or recorder, and this would write the, like, whatever in bullet points, like the different phases. Like if there is a change, they would describe what is the change. That would be one way. Certainly not a perfect way, but I don't think there is a perfect way. But then that, of course, would be a filter again, like having that rule, and that would modify the situation. But it potentially would then bring into the situation that quality you mentioned, like having a record of these changes, which might be how we want to play it potentially.
But I think that's what I meant with the destructive. It's basically hard to be, the filter is what enables a certain vision, right?
Yeah.
And it's immediately in effect, and the amount of, you know, the dimensions of possible residue that it takes away is, I'm not sure that you can access it anymore. You would have had to put another word and then not that word in order to get to a different line of vision. And I think that's what it makes it so destructive. You cannot unthink it anymore. Like,
it makes it, I would say, transformative. Like it's
I don't mean destructive as a negative thing. It's like a mathematical term.
Yeah. I mean, it is destructive, but I would say transformative in the sense, well, transformation also destroys. Like if you take something and transform it, it's not what it was. But it also, there is a new form in it. The one other thing I would say that the filters are kind of operations. Like if we would now, say, spend 5 minutes with, say, the hard capitalist reasons and assemblage, they would not stop. They would not like give one answer and stop there. But they would probably keep on giving. Maybe not infinitely, or maybe there would be a poverty or process at some point. But like as whatever filters you put, like almost directs the direction of transformation. And the transformation just keeps on going. Even if you put all the images off and just look at the image, then there would be, in a way, it behaves like a filter again, because it kind of is a filter, because now it would say, this is what we're looking at. But one key thing I would say here, like, I think we're very close to very simple mechanics. Like, I don't know what the exact direction, like, or they could be coded in many ways, but like this possibility of, okay, we can always add a filter that behaves like a layer. We can say, actually, I like these ones, or I take off these ones, or even I put this on in the front, meaning it's the most important. Like, so all the kind of operations we can imagine from, say, Photoshop in reality kind of work here. And then what's in those filters can be anything like any type. Like, okay, this is a filter that is a row. And then it gives a different function than, say, if it's a goal. But one could think many others, like you could put, I think I have them open. Like earlier examples of these gems, because once again, we're on top of them. There was these different types of filtering text, essentially, like as a way to kind of go from memes. And one of them was this sort of, if you start with the question mark, it's like a question, which is like, it's not what the image tells. Like, there was this idea that this image is part of the city of blues, or these characters called blues, but sites of the city of the blues is something you have to think of as an extra. So it's a question that is like an open, like a question in itself. But similarly, I mean, that behavior, I have to think about my windows, we could put here, say, question, or query, let's see what. Does anybody have a good question to filter like a question that's current context? I can put one, but other questions are and by that I mean, like, what is the meaning of shadows, in the sense that, like, if we think of shadows as kind of meaning, like what would be, for example, a shadow text? There's text and shadow text. How is the shadow text different? And how? And then, of course, the context is the same image which is full of shadows. And then that leads me to think like, oh, okay, shadow is a projection. Like, it's always like there's some source of light, and then it hits something and it leaves this projection of a shadow. And maybe something opens from there, but that's the one possibility of approaching this question in itself. And that is now a filter and a layer, but it has a type of a question. And that's different from a role as a type. So, but this is still rather simple, I would say. Like you have this sort of ability to do this sort of layer-like things, and then you have this ability to give types, species for them, and the types and species can be can provide different kind of directions. But I mean, you could also put like very traditional ones. I put here something super traditional. So somebody could take the role of the leader of the process, or host, which is kind of what I'm taking, kidnapping or so on. But like, even in a kind of traditional sense of, you know, like, this is a meeting, but I'm here, somebody is there as a leader, and it still works. So that mechanic, like this sort of layer-like, and then layers having types, and then applying to a scene that kind of behaves like a canvas. It's whatever is at hand in a way, like whatever is in the context. With those approaches, there's a lot you can do. And in a way, the last few times when we're doing this little rules, we were doing the same thing. Like it was just a different type of filter, which is more textual rules in itself. So for me, it's an interesting direction to think about if what kind of tools could XORG develop, or at least a potential direction of shots in its simplicity and flexibility and like power of different approaches. But I don't know, what do you all think of such a direction? There's a worrisome silence.
I'm trying to leave the space open for others because I've maybe talked too much already.
We could try out the rule of making questions to people. Order is kind of like stupid, but I know Jakub is probably in a problematic situation because he's such a worker nowadays. Like but what if I ask Jakub, but in a manner that, in the style that you don't have to answer if your situation is difficult. But if I ask Jakub, what do you think of that kind of direction in any impressionistic sense? Do you want to answer? This is my role as a soft questionnaire.
Could you just repeat that, please?
So, like, essentially this approach, like looking at this filter-like qualities, but then thinking of them also as layers, you know, this turning on, off, even a priority, which then immediately contains this possibility of layers having different types, like a role or a question, etc., which kind of actually brings in essentially structures from OBOK. Of course, OBOK contains filters as an idea, but this puts them in a different order, but brings kind of role and moves and things like this into it, but then it gives them kind of a structure, which is this sort of like flexibility of how to apply them, and maybe an easy way to create mechanics how to play them. And I do think that's promising as a direction in terms of, you know, a one tool-like or game-like approach an XORG could provide for people, like a framework for many of these concepts and how to make them play and play more flexibly. But yeah, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's potentially fruitful direction. So yeah, to explore more. It's the answer or to answer some question that wasn't asked.
You were cutting out. Like there was. Maybe if you turn off your camera, maybe the upstream works. If you're speaking now, or you're muted. Can you hear us, Jakub?
Yeah, that might be a trick to avoid answering the question, but my laptop is actually freezing out here. So yeah, but I was saying that
we can hear you
I
now.
find it as an interesting direction to explore further. Yeah, the filter likeness and the layers. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or some question which wasn't asked.
No, that's okay. Like this was also an experiment in terms of, because Pablo voted for like having more voices, I created this soft questionnaire role, and then I ask you the question to change the organizational situation by this. Maybe I should add that, and I think it was interesting in itself, like as a mechanic to approach this. And but what about Martin or Rock? I'm still soft questionnaire, so you don't have to answer.
Yeah, I added a question there. I'll have to leave in a minute or two, but just thought to add something, because I thought, yeah, maybe why not directly apply it to an organizational context. And I don't know, I'm seeing, ways that an idea of an organization could relate to all of these concepts and their interrelations. It's a matter of figuring those out. Maybe that's the game.
Yeah, and I do agree that it's kind of like, it's very conceivably a game. Okay, here's how you could play your organization. Even potentially a simple game, which can be, expanded by plugins and whatever, or templates and so on. But it's like I think it's packageable into a fairly simple game-like approach. But it already, if you play it, it takes you into these kind of playful realms. And I think that's an interesting direction, like at least one interesting direction, what I see there.
I was the other part being asked, was I not?
But softly.
Softly, then I will answer softly. So if I, like, for my own comprehension difficulties, repeat what you said, and I try to do that so as you said it, then is it so that we're looking at like the layer mechanic being the faculty of enabling things to be switched off and switched on, right? That's what we understand as this layering mechanic.
And
right?
even ordered or moved and things like this. Yeah.
Okay. But basically independency between these.
Yes.
And I can put them in and I can put them out. And then additionally to that, we have a kind of differentiation of elements that we can, so to speak, add as layers.
Yeah, modularity.
So there's roles, there's goals, there's questions, there's rights, there's whatever, however we want to expand the canon.
Yeah, and types. Like, yeah. Like the role is a type and goal is a type and so on. Like a different type. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's what I mean. Like, this is kind of the scope of elements that we have, which we can throw in a layered way. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, and then in a layered way, and that creates like like this sort of, everything works as a filter, but everything has kind of worked as a filter all along. But it's a kind of a perspective to see it.
Yes.
And it kind of like focuses that direction.
Yeah. So the mechanic of the layering is that it can be switched on and switched off, Photoshop style.
Yes. Yeah. And moved about.
Moved about independently. And the effect of it is that each layer, as it is switched on, brings a certain filtering effect with it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then we have different types.
Yeah.
So then we have a rather clear-cut system, which we basically can a bit more kind of count through. Then I think that is a full-on, like, that is kind of a ready-to-use package. And I think what could be interesting for me would be, I think it could be nice just to spell that out once. What would like a basic set look like right now? Like, basically do that now, like draw from our OPORG or ArcORG or whatever toolkit gives us certain things, and look and try to kind of lay out a system that has, you know, a left and a right and a top and a bottom, and it has a finite number of elements that we now define as the basic elements, just for try.
Yeah, I agree. We can try, and I can give my input. Like everybody can put their own textbooks if they have something to add, but like I can put in, okay, change color, but that's fine. It looks cool. So we have this role, rule, goal, and one can put maybe etc. because there might be similar forms like here. But then we can also think of, well, could be part of the same list, but we can think of the question. And this is a non-exhaustive
I
list.
would make it flat right now. I would just put them next to one another. I would not classify at this moment.
All right, let's follow that. Put them. You might be right. So I have an overt tendency of classification. So then there is a task. And what task I mean, like I can show you an example. So from here, there's actually a lot that came from this gene thinking, but then I saw that it actually a lot of it is just transferable here, and it's rather interesting. There's a lot there, but just this sort of task is like there was this idea that how to make it playable. Well, there was these questions which was kind of like going outside of the scope of the material and imagining around it, which is a quality of question. But then there was in this right bottom corner, there were these things with the exclamation point, which is like potential kind of task-like things you could do. They're quite different from goals. Like, or it's kind of a goal, but it's also kind of different. Like this, like you're seeing this image and there is some filter like things that change it, but then there's like find other wildly different question mark gems for this city. Actually, should be this city. So, or grow the city as a patchwork, and those can be connected things in and of themselves. Now that's a like task. That's what I mean by task. That so it's kind of like a possibility of taking some kind of like thing to approach, and while it's similar to goal, I think it's also different. But then, of course, there is the move, and as a then a kind of connection / relation. I put them on the same line because they essentially the same thing. Like this relates to here, and how.
Yeah, I think that that is a nice one also.
Yeah. And then as a wacky topic, just to put because it's already kind of there, which is the suit, which is kind of like let's put it with a question mark, because like it's fairly particular. It works with this image, for example, is to say now this is a tarot suit called reflections. How that works then is start to make like, okay, I collect maybe other images or maybe even real world situations that also would be tarot cards in the suite of reflections, which is a really interesting thinking direction. Quite adventurous, but certainly works. It doesn't maybe work in every case, but I put it there just as a reminder of like even these kind of things are possible. Like it would be an experimental thought, but you could even take organizational situations and title. Oh yes, title is one. Like just like Pablo put the title on this. The title is one, like which has a sort of a function in a way, like it's a name. Let's put the name as a like. So if one would say in an organizational situation, give a title to it, and then you might think like, okay, with the title, the situation starts to almost be interpreted like a tarot card or similar qualities. But then you can think of suits and suddenly you have like 10 situations that are the archetypes of the organization. That's just an example of like, you can actually also have like quite exotic categories like the suit, and that can create really interesting directions. Like something like a role is certainly more common, but it doesn't cut out the sort of more experimental directions as well.
Pekka, is it not so that we like with these things, these are all kind of micro mechanics, are they not?
Yes.
And now, like just looking roughly at, and like looking at what could be the next step for us now to do with this stuff. Like I'm looking at the list that you wrote. I wrote another one on the left side, kind of in parallel. There's some that kind of are rather close by one another, maybe. I mean, not fully overlapping, but rather close. For example, title and role, I would see as being like near one another, not the same, but near one another.
Interesting. So, like, how do you see title and role being near one another?
If I apply it to a kind of character type.
Oh, okay. Like I see them different, but of course this doesn't matter.
You meant like a headline rather than.
Yeah, I mean like a headline title. Like I was thinking of the tarot card and thinking of what Pablo did.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Like, you know, like you have this image, but suddenly its title is the magician. And that changes. Like it has its own quality. It's different from our,
Yeah. So could we, just for the sake of kind of coming to a scope here, could we maybe go on for another, set amount of time, also including Jakub or Rock had to leave to that, and Pablo?
Yeah, he had a book meeting.
Yeah. And kind of see maybe we can open the OBORG and maybe the XORG or whatever things we found in there. Stretch this list or grow it for 3 more minutes, 5 more minutes max, and then go the opposite way and say, okay, we draw a line somewhere. I drew a line there already, but that's pretty much down. But we draw a line somewhere upwards, and then we have a minimum set. And then we just say, what would we do with a minimum set of 5 elements, 7 elements? And then we can think, okay, so what would be added and in what way when we add, for example, the relation as a plugin to that little game. But should we try to maybe focus on like this kind of like a base set of things?
I think it's a good idea. What about others? What do you think?
Yes, let's do that.
I'm kind of already starting. Like
should I I'm not sure that I have the XORG. I have a folder with these things.
It's there. If you have the access to the folder, then you find the document there, the Google folder.
Yeah, that's my question. No, see, I have a bookmark folder which is called XORG, but it's empty. So I should just go to the Google Drive and download it.
So we can also, like, if people are okay, we can talk over while we're doing it. We can also do this in silence, which is the preference.
So let me just see, I have here an OBORG document. Sorry, no, I'm doing the talking already, but like I'm just trying to kind of keep a time limit.
You can be the host of the rule of time. You can set the time and
okay, yeah, okay. So then I actually do that with I set a 5-minute timer. And
yeah.
I have that. So formal today, Mr. Barr. Timer. Go. Okay, so I'm in the OBORG document now, and I'm just looking at stuff. So I have here organizational mechanics, principles. Everything is frameable as a pattern. Everything is frameable as a version. Everything is an instance to affect the process. Let's not go there. Elements, roles. We
Yes.
have those. Scenes, we have. Pecco, we forgot offers.
Yeah, yes, this is kind of, this is actually true. Offers goes here. It almost behaves slightly differently, but we don't have to concentrate on that. But offers are definitely here. Like,
Yeah, I think offers is
yeah.
We can see if they're kind of in the core set or not, but we can like anyway they then have a list of aspects. Maybe that is now too fine. So rules is basically what we're doing, or like maybe doing at a point. Moves we have. There's slots which I would kind of include.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is like, it's almost like I have to think and write at the same time, which is always hard. But like the slot is like this, like if you make an offer and then like, hey, we could do this and this, and I would need a graphic designer, and that's unfulfilled, like in the project, that is a slot. And let's put that in questions, like, because I do think it fits, but I cannot offhand exactly.
I think it also feels to me kind of typically close to relation.
Yes, it like there is a kind of worms about relations, that everything is a relation as well. But like let's put it as you said. Like I put like question no. Questions in a sense of like these are to think about.
What do you mean? But I think we could decide. Yeah, okay, but go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm putting here like things that have to be thought about, like slots as relations. Like I'm just adding it as a like question. Maybe this could be called more clearly just still to be thought. Like so. Like it's a category that needs some thought still, but like the others are more clear. I also made like into the role that there is a special role of the host, which was what you became with the time. Like in a way, like hosting like something is almost like a special role, and it always has always has a context, meaning like you're a host of the time mechanic now. So that's the context.
We had also the frames in an earlier session.
Like in a way, frames are also everywhere, because like if like frames are a way to see something separate, like very roughly speaking. Like you'd say like every one of these, like if there is a role called the tarot reader, there is a frame around it. And if I would like title, well, when Pablo titled this image, that's utilizing the frame of the image to give it a title. It's almost like the old style of having a frame, and then at the bottom of the frame you have a title. It works the same way.
Is frame very close to filter? Is it very close to our basic mechanic? That's what they're basically saying, right? Aren't you?
Like frame is, like framing is like something we need to do in order to do everything here. It might be kind of like let's put it in the questions, because it's, or the still to be thought part, because like I think it might be just like something that is not so necessary to explain. Like the filter like quality is important to explain, because then it really explains something about the action, explains something how things are different. The framing, maybe not. But I put it in the still to be thought now. The framing is something that it's certainly present, but maybe it's almost like over-explaining to explain it as well.
Yes. Okay, so the Time Lord says the time is up. The Master of Time and Space, there's a title in Helsinki that you can earn at the university. If I didn't say that before, it's called Master of Time and Space, and you can have a certificate that you are that, and it's so desirable, I think.
So the time mechanic layer is now turned off.
The time mechanic layer, so to speak. Yeah, that's a nice point, actually.
Yeah.
Let's sneak that in. Let's sneak that in. We had injury extra time. Let's think the time we should.
We are not anymore under the filter of the time mechanic, like we were. Now we're not. Like this is precisely why this thinking is quite flexible yet quite powerful.
Yeah. Okay. What I would then do now is I would say, so first of all, we assume that none of these things two things. We assume that none of these things that we have added completely overlap with one another. So they are different from one another in at least minute ways. So we know that if we take any of them out of our list, we will lose stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what we're now going to do, right? So we will kind of try to kind of group. We will try to kind of take things away. None of them will be gone, but they will be taken off of the list.
Yeah, I would propose modification to this rule that we make a copy, like that we keep this and make a copy and just edit the copy.
I would do it kind of non-destructive. I would just kind of, what I've been doing now is kind of cutting things out of the list and pushing them to a different corner so that they kind of stay present. But
we could also add an asterisk to those that we want to keep.
Yeah, that's a good idea as well.
Okay, but just that we kind of keep some sense of a visual, like a readability.
Yeah.
So let me start. So Pekko, should we just kind of cross-check what we have now? So maybe if I start, I have the role, you have the role. Then you have also the host in there, which is kind of a different.
It's kind of like the special, but the practical example was what happened to you when you came the host of the time mechanic, which is, I think, a very useful thing to have. It's kind of a role, and it always is connected to something like you were hosting the time mechanic, which was you were running it essentially. Like, and that's what I mean by the host. And it was kind of like maybe it's separate, but I thought like as a first case, it might be this sort of special role in a way.
Yeah, or it can also be that like for each of these kind of types, we find explicits.
Yes, like examples.
So host would be one explicit under the type role.
Yeah, like it might be like a role is almost like this expressive space. Like we could make the role of the questionnaire, and this could be made as an example. But the one reason I wanted to highlight the host is it's almost like it's different.
It's a meta role.
I would say that a game master is a host, and how game master is it's a role as well, but it's kind of a special role. But it's exactly the same as the host. You were the game master of the time mechanic. But now we have modularity. We don't have a game master for the whole game. We can have a game master for one module thing, like one mechanic.
Okay, so good. Then so this comes then to the relation part, right? When you start assigning, kind of what's this type of programming called? When you draw things. What's it called, Pablo? You know that.
With a graphic interface, just inputs and outputs. You
mean? Kind of procedure like patching, kind of. I think that's when that becomes interesting. We could try that also, like visually. Okay, so we have role, we have also rule, we have goal. Then you have question as the next. That is also somewhere down here with me.
Yeah.
then you have that following the goal. We will have to work on the order, of course.
My order is not very
No.
well thought out. Like it's
Okay,
just.
but should we just kind of, because maybe I have different things than you, and we can just kind of play from. Should we go to a clean sheet somewhere, like nearby? Maybe we do the copy now that you will talk.
Yeah, we could do the copying. Or...
I'm going down. I'm going south here.
So maybe we can put this like, because we can always move them back. So we could move them here where there is space and put them on the left side of things. And then right on the right side from here, because there's like space on the screen.
Okay.
That's like.
But we need some kind of, because my screen is in landscape. May I, gentlemen, allow myself to push this a little further away from where we were?
Sure, yes. Okay.
Okay, so here, clean slate.
Yeah. The one thing I could mention is the extras, which might not be the right title, but I can tell what the idea was there. So it came from actually your point when you were saying, okay, I start the clock.
Yeah.
So what is the clock? And this is an object item. And in a way, like, like, it's almost like if you have a rule of time mechanic, like you have this mechanic called time mechanic, but it has like equipment in a way, like, and one of the equipment is a clock. So the object item, and maybe I add like equipment, is an interesting quality in itself. Like you could say, okay, we have a time mechanic, and part of its rules is you need a clock as an equipment to actually run.
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know where to exactly place that. Maybe it's actually just a layer type. Maybe not, but that's why I wrote it as an extra.
I have like quantitatively thinking, I have a bit the feeling that we should kind of, it would be a proposition, or to aim at something that would represent, somewhere between 2 and 5% of what would be possible.
Yeah, like at least a kind of, let's say, start from the key points.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of seeing this as potentially cascading system. And what I mean by this, like, first you meet these 5, and then you have already a game, and then you play. But then at some point you could go kind of one step down, and then there is like, here's some other options. And in a way, like, have the benefits of both the kind of variety, but really saying like, oh, this is all you need to start.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing here also.
Yeah.
Okay, so I took myself the right to just putting a few things there, but
yeah, just go ahead.
Cursors are open.
Yeah, I'm adding some of the like this cascading. Set that.
So I would try to make it a bit layered. So for me, relation is on a different layer right now, as is. I mean, and by this I don't mean, of course, the same layering logic that we spoke about so far.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
But like degrees of depth or complexity.
Yeah, there's completely like the words like role, goal, like, of course these are in normal language, but this is actually a common feature of this sort of games, is that you have certain words that have a specific meaning in the context of now we are playing. Like role now is taken more like the game, but then I can also talk about roles like the normal word, and it's true of layers as well.
I'm making here in the middle a bit like a plug-in number 1, which is kind of not as this, like if you look at relation and slot, they're very abstract terms, so they pack a lot of degrees of freedom. whereas doors and qualities are a little bit more, you know, concrete in what they propose. So they're a bit like more beginners add-on. Oh, the scene, of course, where you're hovering.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm
crucial.
thinking. But you can move it,
Yeah.
and I could add to this.
What do you think about this door/portal kind of element? It's a specific? It's like the mega dungeon add-on kind of. No?
I think it's a good starting point. And I think like I'm actually kind of making this now complementary document. So I'm writing in the still to be thought some of the things that are good mentions here, and like for example, the nature of the scene is like I would almost place it on a different layer. It's almost like a special case. Like for us, the scene is now this, what we're seeing, looking at the people who are involved, the memory of what has happened, that's the scene.
In one way, yes.
And like how to express that is like is interesting. Like in a way, like earlier, the image was forming a scene. Of course, part of the scene was us as well. Yeah.
That's exactly where I was trying to go with this, because I was trying to kind of reserve a place for a more kind of, you know, imagery, you know, presence, because roll, write, move, question, task, they're all very kind of mechanic. They're very, you know, linguistic in that way.
Yeah.
But the scene and the qualities, those two are maybe some that have a different kind of aesthetic dimension.
Yeah, and different behavior. Like in a way, like it's almost like if you would have this canvas and then you would place objects on it. I'm saying objects because objects are easily to think as movable and so on. And the scene is kind of like the canvas on the bottom, like.
Except for, as we have found out with also the genes, they do a lot of work, like game-wise. They're not like just a canvas. They're highly terrained, right? They're like really.
Yeah, I'm meaning a canvas that is not empty.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, like
just because we're looking at one that is rather empty.
Yeah. Yeah, just like the image is a kind of like a key element of the scene and very much scene like it's a filled canvas.
Yes. And good. We didn't have no rules because I feel a little bit like insecure if like to such a minimal set the rules would not be emergent.
So the kind of tricky thing about the rule is like in a way everything is a rule. Like
that's what exactly.
Yeah.
You don't know what is what in a way.
Yeah. This was the kind of direction I was talking about in this session when I was at the airport. Is like it's like every one of these things is kind of like rule-like thing. But then what is the tricky part is like there are things, maybe they should be called mechanics, because everything is a rule. But if you're saying you must do this kind of move and then you have to do this, which is of course a filter again, but it maybe call that mechanic to separate it from the sense that everything is rules. Because I think it's clear that clearer that
I'm putting now. I'm making it a little bigger now. What I've been doing here, by putting on an axis, on a vertical axis, things that I feel relate with one another, so that one could choose among those.
Yes, and I think this is good, and this is kind of what I think as well. There are groupings here.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
that's what I meant to kind of intro when I said we know that they don't. You know, all of them are a bit different. But then there seem to be certain proximities.
Like and And there's even kind of more closeness and less closeness. You could say like goal and objective are quite close to each other.
Yeah.
In a way, task is sort of close to those two, but not quite as close. And then a question is definitely close by. I agree with your grouping, but it's also a little bit different. Like I think question sets up a task. Like that's what we sense when we think of I have to look for an answer. That's a task. But it also has its own qualities of it. So it's in the grouping, but slightly off.
Yeah.
Maybe I reorder these then to not like this. How do I get?
I think I want to pull that qualities. I don't know what to do with that.
Put like maybe the distance isn't. Try to accentuate it more. Yeah, just to have that thought recorded or expressed. And I would put context and scene are sort of close to each other.
And I pushed the frame away because we kind of almost identified it as like some kind of base mechanic similar to rule and filter.
Yes.
Like in their, not similar, but similar in their like level of operation.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah, like I'll actually put those.
Oops, what happened? Did I loosen? What are you knitting there, Pablo?
Doing a traditional diagram. I'm just like translating some of your ideas of what I'm hearing into a diagram.
Which is, I have to go and take a look at it because it's
I
always.
think we need an intro to that too. Once the knitting has a.
I put these three, which are kind of like.
Yeah, I have them down here exactly.
Yeah,
I pushed them.
Yeah. That they are kind of separate in this.
Yes. I think they come close to the kind of main compositional mechanic that we're after here.
Yeah, and I think you're completely right in this sense that they are kind of elementary mechanics. But then because they're everywhere, it's not necessary always to kind of highlight them in a sense like.
Yes. But I think for us, to me anyway, it feels really significant understanding this. What do we mean by filter?
Yeah. Okay.
That feels to me kind of essential in order to be kind of enabled to kind of compose using these main, how do we call them, like core elements here. Yeah,
I recorded your thought, which I agree with, by underlining and bolding the filter.
So, and then let me just go down. If I go down here, do you see what I'm outlining? Like inverter, door, qualities, and time mechanic.
Okay, these ones. Okay.
Yes. So those to me, I would say like each of them can be, so inverter I think is a bit of a kind of lame one because it's very specific. It would have to come with a set of 5 or set of 6 or something like that. Door, I would say, is the Mega Dungeon extension. Time mechanic is also, next level type of extension. And qualities is also a bit in that way because we kind of maybe go to a more, I don't want to say like aesthetic dimension or, a little bit more sensory domain possibly. So these I would kind of say each of them is to me an extension of this basic mechanistic.
Yeah, and I would put, I have to still the bold underline, I have to remove them. I would call like what is the time mechanic? It's could be called order mechanic. And this means like, this is often actually not recognized in some of the game design. It's like, in a way, like turn orders, turns and rounds
Right.
are artificial time. They are sequencing. And they are a way
Yeah.
to create time-like things in the game. And like one way to do it is to play with real time, like having a clock. But it's also sequencing to say, now there's a turn and the mechanics of the turn are this. And then after the turn happens, there is a mechanic of passing it to the next one or asking who takes the next turn or whatever. That's similarly like it's all kind of sequencing.
Yeah, it's funny. Like in my mind, I kind of, when you said move, I was like, yeah, that's a turn.
That's the interesting thing. Like yes, move.
My uneducated mind just made that equivalence.
No, you're right, because like, and that's a kind of worms which we might not open here. But the one thing that is made move interesting is that the current approach to moves is it's like almost like a modular or like a bubble of a turn. Like the move could start anywhere. Like I could say now I do this move, so it's not in a chain. But when you do the move, it has like exact mechanics, so it's kind of like a turn. So it's both kind of floating modularly and contains something turn-like. And that's the interesting quality about these kind of moves that we are talking about, or how we are approaching moves, which is something maybe to write also down, actually. I'll put it in the to be thought.
I'm making our product packaging here right now.
This is good.
That's why I'm a designer, you know, I can only think of products. But not in good, but I'm not a marketing guy, so I can't make shitty names.
Well, coming up with good names is alchemy anyway. Like some people are just good at it.
Okay, I just give up on being creative. I would just put things. So okay, but this is the base set here. I'm not going to label this yet because it's too early.
But I mean, this is already really good material. For example, I've been adding to the to be thought things that are, but that's already like this, and then this to be thought is essentially kind of almost like a to-do, things that need still some addressing. So that's. But the key thing is like the core of this style of play and this game can be kept very simple. It's like how it kind of like with this filter-like quality and this layer-like easy movement, and then these types. That actually I put the types in some. Well, it's layer types. It's listed there. Like that there is this type-like thinking, which creates this sort of palette of operation. Like suddenly thinking, now I make this into a question type or role type, moves your position of like where are you approaching the process, and creates a new category. And if you create a new type, you create yet again like widen the ways of addressing the process. You widen the instrumentation, essentially. What do you think? Like for me, this is a good basis from which to continue. Like this could be like a point of like, okay, looking at all of this and then coming to here next time with the point of like capsuling it a bit further, like thinking, okay, if we have this, how would it be expressed essentially? And what kind of a game could it make? I mean, it's already quite visible of what kind of a game it could make, but maybe there is like further things to shed light on that sense.
Yeah, I think to me it feels almost like wanting to put this to test. You know, let's say,
Yeah,
okay, we have
also.
€5, so we buy the base set now.
Mm-hmm.
The base set now includes this. What kind of scenario and playable game can we create out of that, and how does that then play?
Yes, yeah, like so. I'm kind of for that because isn't it like putting it to playtest before thinking about the expression, but I do think that actually makes a lot of sense. So
I allow myself, Pekko, to kill what you then put there, because now I have everything with the first capital letter and then with the same thing.
You can kill it, yes. Like it's anyway the same thing. So
so this is like meta. No, what did you call it?
Elementary.
Elementary was what you said.
Yeah. Like in the sense of like elements being everywhere. Now take a look at Pablo's diagram.
Yeah, I think we should. Should we throw the two kind of a bit near one another?
We could like reorganize like one way because
frame around these things here quickly, then we have that a bit.
One because everybody's probably on laptop screens, so therefore there is much more horizontal space. So one possibility would be to move the diagram onto the right side of or left side, maybe to the right side of this these texts. So then you can see.
We can just move this whole thing and come down there.
That's also a possibility. Yeah. I can do that because this has a lot of elements into the framing. Maybe like this is here, and then let's move this part into, so they're sort of in order. Yeah, that's now they are on most screens fairly visible.
Now I'm doing my framing quickly here. This one I don't yet know. Okay.
Oh yeah, one thing I want to add, it's adding here. One thing to express is, and this is certainly an extension, but essentially create your own. That you can always create your own roles. You can always create your own types. Like
types is the word you were looking for.
Yeah, but also like here is a role. There is an infinity of roles. But role is a type, and you can create a new type, and there is a potential infinity of types. That's certainly an extension, but like mentioning this to people, Like there's
Yes,
multiple
like a
dimensions of
kind of a
creation.
carte blanche element that
Yeah,
can be,
yeah.
Because I mean, I think it was clear that that when we speak about roles and we kind of introduce if you, so to speak, buy the base set, then the element you get with that is role. But I thought it was clear that that means any role you want to introduce in a game.
Yeah.
Right. So I thought that was so, but it's like, so in that sense, I find it more significant to point out that there is a kind of that there's a blank type, because I know once I get the kind of element role that I can start using, then I know I have any role. But like if the blank type is there, then I can have any type.
Yes, exactly. And essentially expressing this, like I said, it's definitely an extension potential. It's not in the beginning, but it's something that it's not only kind of infinitely expandable, but each scope is expandable. Like,
yeah.
So,
and I mean, like, look, like if you, before Pablo starts us off, if we just look at here, this what I'm been boxing that together, these to me could be like, product boxes. So you have the base set, then you have the mega dungeon extension, which basically contains the element of the door. You have the physics extension, as I kind of clumsily, helplessly call it, which includes the element of qualities. Then you have the time extension, which includes time mechanic. And you have a relational extension, which is the host, the relation, and the slot. And I'm not sure that these, need to be there, but like just kind of to try. And then you have the blank extension, or the, that is that.
Yeah.
And all those can all be torn apart and
I could add to that if I. What's the door in? Is it in a? Oh, now I found. Okay, so there is door, room, corridor, drug fittings. Like these, all of these things are in the Mecha Dungeon extension, potentially.
Just to my taste this year.
Yeah, I was a side note, which I can tell at some time later. At some, I was today. I caught this blog post where somebody had tracked down the first idea of a dungeon, and there's this famous quote from Dave Arneson, who came up with the idea that he was reading Conan books, but he doesn't remember which ones because they're all the same. And he was watching monster movies, eating popcorn, and drawing on a graph paper. And that's when the dungeon was born. And somebody had tracked down which movies he had watched because he knew what TV channel he had, and tracked down to that date which monster movies they had, and then tracked down from his library which Conan books he was reading. And so I managed to find one is the House of Dracula, the movie. I managed to find it in YouTube, and I found the Scarlet Citadel is one of the Conan stories he was reading. So I was reading it. It's a really interesting because they kind of actually, it's a very worthwhile. You actually find, okay, this is where he was figuring that part.
But you forgot a crazy important element.
Which one?
What's the popcorn he was eating?
Oh yeah, yes.
How can you ever time travel in this way without?
But maybe you can simulate that by eating other trash food, or maybe popcorn while doing this, like watching the movie. And
how do you think you have to be specific on these certain aspects, but not specific about this one?
I honestly think you probably should be specific, and would be interesting exercise. Let's say I was half-assing it. Like I'm definitely recognized that I was half-assing thing. That I was taking the easy ones. I didn't have popcorn but I found the movie on YouTube and I found the book on Gutenberg project. So
2 out of 3, Pekka.
yeah, 2 out of 3. Yeah, but yeah, but it really actually works because like reading the text was kind of uncanny because you could recognize, oh, okay, that's where that part is was highly influential, and how you can still see that part all the way through culture of all the video games and so on. And it might not have happened if he hadn't read that Conan story. Like one of them is full of traps and always talks about traps. And I trapped every room. There's this magician who says, I trapped every room in my house. And would it actually happen, never happened in that extent if he wouldn't have read that particular rogues in the house story.
Funny.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
But that's for the Mecha Dungeon next.
Now I grab my popcorn and I'm waiting for Pablo's.
Yes, Pablo. Can you as a finish us with taking your description of the diagram, because I quite like it.
I mean, I guess I do diagrams not to have to do explanations, but I'll do it even if it's a bit redundant. I'm just exploring scope, where things happen, what's inside what, and how they translate to different contexts. So how engines generate metas, how rights are sort of like mediating all of the things. Everything can be understood in terms of rights. On inside of the meta, the rights manifest as rules and roles. And then inside of the meta, there's scenes. The roles manifest as moves. The goals manifest as objectives. There's filters that affect the perception of scenes, but also the perception of metas. And there's also states that save. In this case, it's a saving state that save current moments of a scene. You can plug in inside the meta, bring it inside, pull it outside. So yeah, I guess it's a diagram referring to the main concepts, because I see some of the concepts in the green boxes as subset of other concepts. For example, maybe a task could be understood first as a goal and inside a scene, maybe as an objective. I mean, all of this debatable, of course, but the main ones and sort of like how they interplay in different scopes.
Yeah, I quite like it.
Yes.
The one thing I would add is where you have the rights going to rules and the rights going to roles, I would make it two-directional arrow. Like in a way, like because when you make, for example, a role, well, first you have a right, for example, to make the role, just like you drawn. But then when you make the role, you put into the role rights. And while it might seem wacky, it's kind of how it works. Like these kind of things are in this nesting reality, that you see patterns of these forms in nesting into each other. Like a right gives the right to create the role, and then into the role you put rights again.
Would you do the same for goals and roles? Goals, roles, objectives, double arrow?
Potentially, yeah. Potentially, I think it's good for now. Also, like you can also take the kind of the host rights. You are the host of this,
and of the diagram.
Host rights of the diagram layer, and think when things become too complicated, because also diagram doesn't have to explain everything. It's always like taking its own filter to the whole. Like it doesn't have to contain everything. So like just keep it as you would like, and what are the important things. But I do think it's telling, and also like that the filters are in this sort of like well, in a filter-like manner, like the gray quality. It's sort of like, I think, this illustrative. I think it's a good word. And then yeah, like this. And also, like, it's good that you pointed out the saving and capturing. I added to the to-be thought.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I guess the only insight I got from making this diagram, other than being confused about arrows, is sort of like thinking of XORG as a framework for generating metas, like as an engine for generating metas for organizations to be explored, to explore.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, the meta is sort of like, meta behavior is sort of like, it's almost like when you create this layer, like then you have a meta to it. Like it's the same as what we think in consciousness, in the sense of, like, it's different than if you are looking at the object, like say an artwork, and then you're actually thinking about, I am looking at the object. So then you have like this separation in itself. And creating this meta is precisely like, wait a minute, I'm taking like one layer upwards to look at the situation. But then you have essentially a surface to express upon. Like, okay, I could change this part and that part from that situation. And then I could dive in back. And that is the kind of what is powerful about this, because like you can go out and then change it. And of course, approaching it like this makes it highly changeable. Like there are very simple tools that create substantial changes to the structure itself. Like, oh, I now added this role, and now it's there available, and that means that the situation is different. Or I added this mechanic, or yeah.
I'd just like to ask a question here. Pablo, you now chose these arrows as in order to represent connections between elements that you perceive, and I'm making this up. I'm sure that you didn't think that way, but I'm just as a try to represent connections between elements that you perceive to be stronger than connections between elements which you did not represent with an arrow. So my question in this is, if we say that the main kind of, so to speak, relational mechanics that these elements have is their faculty of filtering each other, like polymutually, as I, you know, are these arrows helpful in this way? Do we need, because basically what they speak about is that there's a difference in relationship, in quality of relationship. Some are stronger than others. Those that have arrows are stronger relationships than those that don't have arrows. And I'm just wondering if it is kind of helpful for this kind of flat ontology type of set to work with arrows, because like rightfully, there would be, hang on, I can scroll because I'm there would be also relationships to be drawn between others. And I mean, you have also nested relationships, you have overlapping, you have proximity relationships. So there's a lot of relationships that are existing there in a kind of qualitative explication. Whereas, like, I'm just asking this, like, because it's really kind of also kind of taxing task to try and diagram this. And then on the other side, as I like, there's these kind of things which basically exist next to one another, you know?
Yeah. I mean, definitely the diagram is a filter itself upon the concepts, in a way that it's like, if the concepts in the list are flat, then here there's like a third dimension added, maybe 4 dimensions added. One of them is scope and one of them is relations, both with the arrows and spatially. I guess also visually, for me, it's easier to understand things. But it's also, it can be broken, and flatness also allows for a different type of associations. And I saw that while you were speaking, right? While you two were having this, putting things in boxes as well, moving from flat to groups. I was doing like scopes. So
Yeah.
they're both filtering as well.
Yeah, very much so. Like it's once again kind of, once you look at these things in a filtering manner, it's almost obvious that any diagram is filtering as well. Like and I do think like actually it also, like often when there are complex topics, my kind of rule of thumb with diagrams is it's almost like more is better. Like it's like if you have like this diagram and that diagram, it kind of puts you in this position where you already understand that, okay, like these are perspectives, these diagrams, they filter this, and like, but I think like what they express in and of themselves can be useful, and we can look at like maybe adding another diagram or thinking about diagram in certain areas as a way of expression, certainly.
What I think is funny, and like I'm a huge fan of this problematic of diagramming, and Pekka, I'm sure that you remember me remember me saying this multiple times when we were in the conference week there. I think this might also be a kind of thing that this thing is actually here for. You know, these set of elements are really there in order to catalyze a task of diagramming and to spring it in that sense.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just wondering if, like, in on my side with respect to family life, I should maybe soon go.
Yeah, we're nearing the end anyway. The conversation was just so good that didn't have the heart to do a hard stop. I mean, trying to kind of slowly bring, because it's also like respective of everybody's time. Like, but like it was such a good conversation. Like, but yes, I think we're nearing the point. And like the earlier when I made this proposal that looking at this, well, I think Martin, you made a good modification that the next thing would be playtesting rather than thinking of the packaging necessarily. I think that's actually better. That just to take some of the elements here and put them in playtest is a good next step.
Yeah, but the packaging, if that's what you're referring, and also not trying to extend this here any further, but I thought it was, for me, it was more the exercise of like how to understand what what would be a crystal, like a so to speak, essential set of things, and what dimensions would open up. But I think, guys, I hope I can make it next week so much.
I hope it as well, and I think it was really good that you made this, like you essentially made a set of rules and became the host of let's do it this way, and well, it was accepted, but it was a really good change of phase, phase as in like sequence of time, that it kind of put many of these things that were there, they were hovering, and just writing them out in multiple fashions is very useful, I think. So I think it substantializes things quite a bit. So yeah, thanks for that. But hey, any last words next time towards playtesting this? I can take a step because I think there is a really simple core. I mean, it's been gone through many times, this like how everything is a filter. There can be filter types, and they function like layers, which is almost like how do you think about it structurally, how the bricks can be placed. That's the layer thing, and that's really the core of it. And so there is a kind of this sort of simple frame. We can start from some configuration of the simple frame for playtesting next time. Any last words?
This was great.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Fucking privilege. Very nice.
Yeah, and it's close to actually getting to a game that has a very vast scope of expressivity and generativity, because like being able to generate many kinds of, or create many kinds of processes expands the expressivity, because in every process you will express differently. So with that, as kind of some kind of last words, I will stop the recording now.